Time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Craig, I don't think there was much doubt from last night that J.D. Vance had a good night. I don't know if Tim Walz actually lost, but J.D. Vance emerged as a different candidate. You're our expert on vice presidents. I mean, does this matter? And at the end of the day, does it really help Donald Trump that his running mate had a good night?
Well, let's take the first question, does it matter? You know, typically people say, no, vice presidential debates don't matter much. Because the race is so close, I think everything matters. I really think you can't discount this as certainly as having an impact on those undecided voters in the key states. So the question is, what do they think? To be honest with you, it doesn't matter so much what we think, and it doesn't matter so much what people who have already locked in to either Trump or Harris think. It's those undecided voters. So, you know, I watched last night and again today the pundits on television handing this to Vance and some expressing disappointment at Walz. I'm really not so sure that's the right way to look at it, because first of all, I found myself wondering, who is this guy standing next to Tim Walz, and what did he do with J.D. Vance? Because it wasn't the person we've been hearing from and seeing and listening to. And so because so many of the undecided voters are in Middle America or the South, I have to wonder whether the Yale Law School, sharp-looking guy who was there, who said he was J.D. Vance, whether he really came across as well as Tim Walz did. And, one of the great little pieces of advice that caused me to laugh was from Dana Bash, who actually I like, but she said, it's really, Tim Walz needs to be talking to more of us who are journalists. He'll get better at this. And I thought, yeah, great advice. Spend more time with the press. To a degree, she's right in the sense that the more interaction you have on the campaign trail, the better you get at some of this. But honestly, judging Tim Walz by a standard of, anchor person on television is not really fair. And I think Tim Walz delivered a stronger presentation than some of the pundits are suggesting. I particularly think he made some strong points on immigration. I think his close was probably the strongest, and I'm sure we will see it in ads, or at least people will see it in some of these swing states, on the question of, to J.D. Vance, do you think Donald Trump lost the election? A question which he seemed to be unable to answer. And those moments, we have to remember, are moments that probably more people will see than actually watch the debate, even though I'm sure at the beginning of the debate there were a lot of people tuned in. I'm not sure how many lasted the 90-plus minutes or so of the debate. So I think both, in some ways, both candidates helped themselves. I saw some polling that said the favorability numbers were up for both of them. Up, by the way, more for Walz than for Vance, I think. But, I don't know that it is driving a lot of voters one direction or another. The question is, where is it sitting with those all-important undecided voters, and did it push a few in the direction of the Harris campaign?
Al, you feel like J.D. Vance won last night?
I think what Craig said is really right on target. I sort of tried to pull this out and give you five observations about the debate. But first, I think that J.D. Vance helped J.D. Vance more than he helped Donald Trump. And I think that probably was his intention. Here's number one. Look, vice presidential debates, I don't think really matter very much. Craig knows that, because what was the greatest vice presidential moment debate moment ever. It was Senator Benson telling Dan Quayle that he was no John Kennedy, who was the vice president. Dan Quayle. And Bush won over 40 states. I mean, so made a big difference, huh? The second thing I'd say, I think J.D. Vance is an excellent debater. He learned well at the Yale Law School. I think on style and in tone, and certainly in the view of the pundits, as Craig said, he probably won the debate, but in view of truthfulness, he didn't win it. He lied almost every answer. The point that Craig made is really important. The word I heard for J.D. Vance last night was chameleon. It was a very different J.D. Vance on that debate stage than we've seen on the campaign trail, except for one thing. He continued to lie. And in the end, I think that probably is going to wind up costing him more. The third point is, despite the view of pundits, and Craig made this point, and he's right, and the snap polls, both by CNN and Politico, showed voters basically came out where they came in, that it was basically thought the debate was a tie, and that while Vance did improve his standing, Walz really came out better. The CNN poll, with, I think, what is an astonishing, think about this, plus 37 approval rating, 59% had a favorable impression of him, 22% unfavorable. In today's world, that's incredible. Vance improved a lot too, but he's still underwater. More people still viewed him unfavorably by 3% than were favorably. And on other questions, like, are you more in touch with people like me? Whose vision of America is more consistent with mine? Walz won. So, people, I think, admired Vance's performance, but they were skeptical of what he was saying. It may not have appealed to people like us who were aggressive debaters, but Walz's style had a real appeal. And that gets me to my fourth, and what I'd say is the most important thing about the debate. And that's, voters don't remember much about these debates. All the style stuff will fade away very quickly. But usually there's a moment in a debate, or often there's a moment in the debate that stands out and has legs. I mean, think about Jerry Ford in 1976 saying there's no Soviet domination in Eastern Europe. Probably cost him the election. Last night, that moment was on January 6th. When Vance couldn't admit that Trump lost the debate, wouldn't say that. When he talked about Trump having a peaceful transfer of power, when everybody saw that he, caused a riot on January 6th, and didn't even go to the inauguration on January 20th, I mean, people know that's a lie. Claiming that Trump saved Obamacare, when everybody in the world knows that he tried to repeal it from day one. And then even, and I think he could have even been more sharp on January 6th in pointing out the lie. So overall, here's what I'd say. I think Vance did exceed expectations. But the lasting impact of the debate is probably going to be his big mistake on January 6th, and that's going to cut for Walz.
Craig, when I think about Tim Walz and this remarkable rise that he experienced, do candidates like Walz peak too early?
It's a good question, and I think that maintaining momentum is, in my view, hugely important. It's difficult to do, and it requires real strategic thinking so that you don't, in fact, peak too early. And this contest this year makes it difficult because it's so reduced in time between the announcement of Kamala Harris and then her pick of a vice president. But I think they're doing pretty well. I want to also add to what Al was saying. I think that question of, can you say that Donald Trump lost the election? It will not be, last night will not be the last time that J.D. Vance hears that question. And if Al and I had anything to do with the campaign, he'd hear it at every single stop he got to. And the way to do that is to make sure the local press are asking the question so that he has to confront it. And the moment he answers with something other than what he said last night, which wasn't so good, but the moment he changes the answer, that's a news story. And then he'll change it again, and that's a news story. So I think that one is going to stick. The other thing about Walz's performance, I don't know that this was the strategy, but I think the way it's worked out, as those of us who have watched some of the coverage last night and again throughout the day, because Walz wasn't more feisty, and by the way, I think people like that on the one hand, except the press didn't because they wanted to fight. But because he wasn't so feisty, the media saw fit to literally take apart J.D. Vance's performance on the substance. And so they did what they hoped Walz would do, but Walz didn't have to do it, but it got done, if that makes any sense. And I almost think that that's better for Walz. Walz can maintain this persona that he's a decent guy, that he wants to work with people, that he wants to get things done. At the same time, their critique on J.D. Vance is he simply wasn't saying last night what he said before. And the problem with the Trump campaign is that neither Trump nor Vance can stay on message. So the likelihood that J.D. Vance's answers from last night can last for another 30-plus days, to me, is fairly low. And that, again, will cause criticism. But they have to keep the momentum going. It's an excellent question. And they have to keep it going in these key states in order to get the voter turnout. There was a fascinating presentation today by Amy Walters in Washington, D.C. I'll just take 30 seconds to say the numbers that caught my attention were that in the key states, they now say they think Trump has locked 35% of the vote. Those people will vote for Trump no matter what. And there's another 17% to get him up near 50 that like Trump's policies, but they don't like Trump. And they wish they could find somebody that would pursue particularly the economic policies without all of the theatrics that go with Donald Trump. And to me, that's a turnout problem, because that says there's a block of voters who are Trump supporters when the pollster calls them, who still are debating whether or not they can get comfortable voting for him. And so the momentum that is needed for both sides, but the momentum needed is a momentum that will bring out those voters in large numbers in November.
Al, you have the last word.
Well, first of all, on your question about did J.D. Vance or did Tim Walz peak too early, my answer is he hasn't had enough time to peak too early. I mean, this is such a short campaign. People are just getting to know him. And the idea that in a performance that the pundits didn't like, ordinary people sought, 60% of them basically said they had a favorable impression of him, says he's just doing fine and he ought to keep that up. I mean, people vote for president, and Trump doesn't like it when other people get attention. So Lord knows what he's going to say about J.D. Vance in the days ahead. Most interesting, in the middle of the debate, he tweeted about the death of Pete Rose, which is just astonishing. I mean, he probably thought Vance was doing too well at the beginning, and he didn't want to get that attention away from him. After the Republican convention, Craig and I talked about Trump's speech and how the new Trump would last 15 minutes, and it lasted 15 minutes. And so I don't think this kinder, gentler J.D. Vance is going to rub off on Trump, and he's going to be a kinder, gentler guy. Trump has that ceiling. I mean, he has this hardcore base, and Amy says it's 35%. maybe 40, whatever it is. But that's where he gets those voters. But it's the voters in between that matter. Last night is not going to make any big difference on the race. But to the degree there's anything in it that will have legs, it is the continued election denial by Vance. And just remember what happened in 2022 when we're supposed to have a red wave in the Senate. And it was all the election deniers who fell just a little bit short. And, so in the short term, the smooth talking Yale law school guy may have impressed a lot of pundits. But in the long term, the words that came out of his mouth may cut very much against him.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.